Your supermarket is probably breaking the spirit of the law, if not the letter of it. Since 2014, every pack of mince sold here must legally state where the animal was born, reared and slaughtered. Here's the annoying part. Nobody's actually breaking that law. They're exploiting the hole in it. Product of the UK satisfies the rule and says nothing. The one word that actually matters, the farm, was never required. We tested 11 stores, 8 failed, 3 didn't. And the one that beat them all isn't even a supermarket. It's a farm shop with a car park you could miss if you blinked. Start with the one everyone knows. Roughly a quarter of the country does its weekly shop at Tesco, which makes it the fairest place to set our baseline, because whatever Tesco's doing, millions of us are already doing it too. Grab a standard Tesco 5% fat steak mince, and the label does exactly the legal minimum, and not an inch more. Product of the UK. A red tractor logo, which just means the animal was reared to a basic assurance standard. Nothing more specific than that. No named farm, no county, no date it was actually ground, just a use-by stamp that could mean this morning or 4 days ago. Take your pick. To be fair to them, Tesco has actually improved a lot here. Their Aberdeen Angus and finest ranges genuinely do carry proper farm assurance detail, and their supply chain checks are tighter than people give them credit for. But that's the premium shelf, the everyday tube that's actually filling most trolleys, the one going into a bolognese on a Tuesday night in a house with 2 kids and a dog, that sails through on the bare minimum. A quarter of the country is cooking with beef that tells them almost nothing about where it grew up. That's not some huge scandal. It's just the industry standard, dressed up to look like more than it is. And it's the bar every other store on this list now has to beat. On to the budget challenger. Aldi's whole pitch has always been simple. Same quality, none of the fuss, a third off the price. And I'll give them this, the mince genuinely holds up. Good colour, decent texture, doesn't flood your pan with water the way some value ranges do. But run it through our 3 questions and it falls apart fast. Produced in the UK for Aldi Stores Limited. No farm, no county, no name supplier anywhere. Aldi keeps prices low by pooling supply from whichever assured UK abattoir can fill the order that week, which is efficient, sure, but it also means the trail goes cold the second you try to follow it past the border. Ask a store manager which farm supplied this week's mince, and you'll get a shrug, because they genuinely don't know either. Nobody in that building does. To be fair, Aldi never claimed to be a farm shop. It sells itself on price and consistency, and it delivers on that every single week without fail. So call this a pass on value and an honest fail on transparency. They're not lying to you, they're just not telling you anything at all, and there's a difference, even if the shelf looks identical either way. Now the premium contrast, and this is where it gets more interesting, because M&S has built its entire meat reputation on one word: provenance. Pick up a pack of M&S Select Farms beef mince, and the label actually works for its money. It names the Select Farms scheme outright. A network of British farms M&S has worked with for years, some for decades, with welfare and feed standards well above the red tractor floor. There's a farm assurance number you can actually look up. There's a proper steak and shin blend named on the pack, not just beef, like it's a mystery ingredient. What it still doesn't give you, and this is the honest bit, is the name of the actual individual farm on that specific pack, the way a real farm shop would. Select Farms is a curated group, not one address you could drive to on a Sunday. So M&S sits in a slightly odd spot, well ahead of the supermarket average on standards, but still one step short of the full transparency the packaging almost promises. You're paying a real premium here and getting a real checkable improvement for it. Just don't confuse part of a trusted scheme with this exact cow, this exact field. M&S never quite closes that gap, and at these prices they should. Back to the mainstream, and Asda's the one that accidentally tells on the whole industry. They're Just Essentials Mince, the rock-bottom range built for a cost of living crisis, answers precisely none of our 3 questions beyond the legal floor. UK red tractor, and that's your lot. But step up one shelf to their butcher's selection, and something actually changes. Named cut, fat percentage printed clearly instead of buried in tiny type. A packing date that's genuinely within a day or 2 of purchase, not some vague window. And here's what that tells you. because we're going to see this exact story again and again across this list. The information already exists. The systems to trace it, verify it, and print it properly are already sitting inside these companies, one shelf up from where most people actually shop. It's just kept for the range with the fatter margin, the family on a tight budget, the exact household that could use to know precisely what's in its mince, gets the least information about it. That's not some accident of logistics. That's a choice about which customers get told the truth. Right, here's our first proper surprise. Macknade, down in Faversham, Kent. This place has been quietly trading since 1888, back before the word artisan got worked to death. Queen Victoria was still on the throne when this shop opened its doors, and it's been going in one form or another, on the same patch of Kent ever since. Sit with that for a second. Most of the names on this list didn't exist 100 years ago. Macknade was already 3 generations deep. Their beef mince is butchered on site, from cattle sourced from name farms across Kent and the wider southeast, and the staff behind the counter will tell you exactly which farm that batch came from without blinking, because they cut it themselves that morning. No central plant, no supply chain stretching across 3 counties. That cow was almost certainly grazing a short drive from the till you're standing at. The trade-off, and it's real, is reach. One site. You can't pop in on the way home from work unless you happen to live near Faversham, and the price reflects proper hands-on butchery rather than an industrial operation. But on every single one of our 3 questions, farm, cut, freshness, this small food hall beats every supermarket we've tested so far, and it barely has to try. It just never stopped doing things the way butchers did them before case-ready packaging took over the industry, before half the names on this list even existed. Sometimes the gold standard never actually disappeared. It's just been sitting there, 40 minutes down the road, still doing exactly what it did in 1888. Right, before we hit the second half of this test, and it only gets better from here, do me a favour. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling me which of these 5 has surprised you most so far, and if you haven't already, subscribe and turn the bell on, because we're putting the food in your fridge on trial every single week, and you'll want to see how this one finishes. Back to familiar ground. Sainsbury's has always marketed itself as the thinking shopper's supermarket, the one slightly ahead on ethics and sourcing. Their Taste the Difference beef mince backs that up better than most. British Aberdeen Angus, a named breed rather than just beef, and a specific supplier group called the Sainsbury's Beef and Lamb Advisory Group that's been running for years to guarantee traceability back to the farm gate. Genuinely one of the more transparent premium ranges in this whole test. The catch is the same one we keep running into. That transparency belongs to Taste the Difference. Sainsbury's standard own brand mince, the stuff actually filling most trolleys, drops back to the same UK and red tractor baseline as everyone else. So the honest verdict here is a tale of 2 shelves inside one company. Reach for the top range and you get some of the best traceability in mainstream British retail. Reach for the everyday range, the one actually paying the wages, and you're right back where Tesco started this whole test. The premium supermarket, and this is the one where the reputation actually holds up under a proper look, which doesn't happen as often as you'd hope in this business. Waitrose names the farming standard directly on the pack, often specifying pasture-based rearing and their supplier relationships, especially the long-running partnership with the National Trust and individual British farms, are some of the best documented in the whole sector. Waitrose has published details of its individual meat suppliers on its own website for years, which is exactly the kind of thing our 3 questions are built to reward. Where it stumbles gently is the same place M&S does. A pasture-based farm in our network isn't quite this specific farm this specific week. You're trusting the company's word for the standard, rather than tracing one animal back to one gate, but of every conventional supermarket in this test, Waitrose gets closest to closing that gap, and the price, eye-watering as it is, at least buys you something real, rather than just the atmosphere of a nicer lit aisle. Now for something genuinely odd. A farm shop built into a motorway services station on the M5. Sounds like a joke until you've actually stopped there. Anyone who spent decades of family holidays dreading the services stop. The sad sandwich, the tired forecourt coffee, the fluorescent lighting that makes every single stop feel identical, no matter where in the country you are. Genuinely owes it to themselves to see this one, because it breaks every expectation that history's taught them to have. Gloucester Services sources the vast majority of its beef from farms within 50 miles, and the Mince counter will name the actual supplying farm on any given day, same as Macknade. It's run as a social enterprise, profits going back into local community projects, and the meat counter treats a motorway stop the way a proper village butcher would treat a Saturday morning regular. You're buying mince that's travelled less distance from field to counter than most supermarket beef travels from central plant to shelf. Stand there 5 minutes, and you'll hear the assistant answer a question about the cattle's grazing land, like they've been in this trade for 3 generations, not running a business built to catch passing traffic off a slip road. And the irony's worth sitting with for a second. A motorway services, the most anonymous, forgettable stretch of British infrastructure going, is out-transparencying nearly every household name on this list, which sort of proves the whole point of this test. Provenance was never about the size of the building. It was always about whether anyone inside it actually still knows where the meat came from. If a stop on the M5 can get this right, there's genuinely no excuse left for anyone else here. Back to a household name, and Morrisons has one real structural advantage almost nobody else in the mainstream sector still has. It owns its own abattoirs and processing sites, and has done for years, instead of outsourcing to third-party plants. This is the chain that built its whole reputation, especially up in Yorkshire and the north, on being a proper butcher's shop that happened to grow into a supermarket, not the other way round. That vertical integration means Morrisons can actually trace Mince back through its own supply chain more directly than most competitors its size. Counter service in the bigger stores, where it's still around, gets you close to a proper butcher's exchange. Name the cut, ask a question, get a straight answer from someone who genuinely knows, which is the exact experience a lot of you will remember from decades before self-service tills and pre-packed trays took over the aisle completely. But the packaged mince on the standard shelf, the tube most people actually grab, still falls back to the same UK and red tractor baseline. No named farm, no date beyond the use by stamp. So Morrisons has built more capability behind the scenes than most of its rivals. Genuinely the infrastructure to be the most transparent supermarket on this whole list. It's just chosen not to put that on the label the customer actually reads. That's not a failure of ability, that's a failure of will. And honestly, it's the most frustrating result in this entire test, because the honest version was sitting right there one processing site away, and had been for years before we ever filmed this. The community favourite, and this one earns real credit, because Co-op's ownership model genuinely shapes its sourcing in a way most shareholder-driven chains just can't match. Anyone who remembers the old dividend stamp books, kept in a kitchen drawer and cashed in twice a year, knows the Co-op was never just another shop. It belonged literally to the people shopping there, and that history still quietly shapes how the business talks about where its food comes from. Co-op's committed publicly to sourcing 100% of its fresh beef from British and Irish farms, and its own brand Mince carries clearer welfare and sourcing commitments than several supermarkets twice its size. As a member-owned business, some of that margin genuinely flows back into community causes rather than disappearing into a distant shareholder return, which is worth something even if it never shows up on the nutritional panel, and worth a good deal more to a generation that remembers exactly what that dividend meant to a household budget. Where it still falls short of our top scores is the same familiar gap: regional and national commitment. Yes. Individual named farm on the pack in your hand? Not yet. It's a values-led business doing values-led sourcing at scale, and scale's exactly what stops it reaching the specificity a small farm shop manages without even trying. A solid, honest mid-table result, built on a genuinely different set of priorities to almost everyone else on this list, and priorities that go back further than most shoppers under 40 would probably guess. And now, the finish. We started this test with the biggest name in British grocery, and we're ending it with the smallest farm shop on the list. And somehow, that farm shop out-transparencies every single one of them. You already know the story, probably better than I do. A famous former motoring presenter buys a struggling farm in Oxfordshire, works out within a single series of television just how brutally the economics of British farming actually work, and builds a farm shop that sells, among other things, beef mince from cattle he raised on that exact land. The label, and there isn't much of one, tells you the animal was born and reared on the farm, names the farm outright because there's only one, and the meats typically travelled less than a mile from field to counter. For anyone who grew up when the village still had its own butcher, when the farmer down the lane genuinely did sell you meat off his own land, and who's watched that whole way of doing things quietly vanish over the last 50 years, replaced by central plants and case-ready trays, and a supply chain nobody can actually follow anymore. This pack of Mince is doing more than just selling beef. It's proving, almost by accident, the one thing this whole test has been chasing across 10 other stores, that the old way was never actually impossible. It was just abandoned, bit by bit, in favour of scale. And here it still is, standing in a farm shop that happens to have a famous name on the gate. Run our 3 questions against this pack and every single one gets answered before you've even finished reading it. Which farm? This one, obviously, there's no other option. What cut, what fat percentage? Named plainly, because there's no marketing department standing between the farmer and the customer. When was it ground? Recently enough that the honest answer is yesterday, probably. It's the control group this entire test has been measuring everyone else against. Not because it's clever marketing, though it certainly benefits from a famous face attached to it, but because it's simply doing what a farm has always done, selling you the animal it actually raised, the way farms did it long before any of the other 10 names on this list existed at all. I'll be honest about the complication because it's a real one. You can't build a nation's food supply on farm shops. Diddly squat sells what one farm can produce. It could never feed a country this size, and it shouldn't have to. The lesson here isn't ditch the supermarket, drive to Oxfordshire. It's that the traceability this farm shop offers, without even trying, is entirely achievable at scale. Because Waitrose gets close, because M&S gets close, because Morrisons already owns the infrastructure to do it and simply hasn't bothered. The technology, the will, the systems all already exist inside Britain's biggest grocers. What's missing isn't capability. It's the decision to put it on the label the ordinary shopper actually reads, not just the premium one, and not just the small farm shop that still writes it out by hand. So here's where that leaves the meat aisle. 8 stores answered our 3 questions with the bare legal minimum, or less, hiding behind a flag and a logo that tells you almost nothing about the actual animal. 3 of them, a farm shop by a motorway, a food hall in Kent trading since Victoria's reign, and a farm belonging to a man who used to argue about cars on the telly, answered every single one without hesitation. Because for them, transparency was never a marketing decision. It was just how the shop had always been run, in some cases for well over a century. So next time you're standing in that aisle, run our 3 questions yourself. Does it name the farm, not just the country? Does it tell you the cut and the fat percentage properly? Does it tell you when it was actually minced? A pack that answers all 3 has nothing to hide from you. A pack that answers none has told you everything you need to know. It just hasn't used any words to do it. If this changes how you read that label next time you're doing the weekly shop, hit like. It genuinely helps get this in front of more families still grabbing the mystery tube without a second thought. Subscribe, turn the bell on, because we're putting British food on trial every single week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Tell me in the comments which of these 11 surprised you the most. I read every single one. And if you know someone who does the family shop every week and never once turns the pack over to check, send them this. They'll thank you for it. Next week, we're heading into a completely different aisle, one where the label's been quietly telling almost the exact same story. See you then.